Marcus rejected Evelyn in front of the entire community, claiming she lacked the spiritual strength worthy of his bloodline. But 3 weeks later, when supernatural creatures began hunting her from the shadows, she discovered that her so-called weakness hid a power that would make any alpha tremble with desire. Isabella's eyes snapped open to unfamiliar silk sheets that felt like chains against her skin, her heart hammering with the terrifying certainty that her life had shattered beyond recognition. The room surrounding her breathed luxury and menace in equal measure. Crimson velvet curtains blocked out what little light attempted to penetrate the space, while golden fixtures gleamed like predatory eyes in the shadows. The scent that filled her nostrils was wrong, too clean, too perfect, carrying undertones of something wild and untamed that made her skin crawl with primitive fear. Her fingers clutched at the Egyptian cotton beneath her, seeking anchor in a world that had tilted dangerously off its axis. Where was she? The question echoed through her mind like a scream trapped in glass. But no answers came, only fragments of sensation that felt more like dreams than memory. A car ride through darkness, voices speaking in hushed tones about destiny and bloodlines. The prick of something sharp against her arm before consciousness had abandoned her completely. The massive oak door creaked open without warning, and Isabella's breath caught in her throat, as the most imposing man she had ever seen filled the doorway. He moved with liquid grace, each step calculated and purposeful, like an apex predator surveying his territory. His dark hair caught the dim light, and when his gaze settled on her, she found herself staring into eyes of molten gold that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "You're awake," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made the air itself seem to bend around him. There was something in his tone that suggested this was not merely an observation, but a command that reality had obeyed. "Good. We have much to discuss, Isabella." The sound of her name on his lips sent ice through her veins. How did he know who she was when she could barely remember arriving here? She pulled the sheet closer to her body, suddenly aware that she wore nothing but a silk nightgown she had never seen before, in a shade of midnight blue that matched the depths of his unsettling stare. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, smaller and more fragile than she remembered. "Where am I?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it held no warmth, only the satisfaction of a chess player who had just executed a flawless opening move. "I am Darius Blackthorn, Alpha of the Northern Pack, and you, my dear Isabella, are in my home. More importantly, you are here to fulfill a destiny that was written in your blood before you took your first breath." The words hit her like physical blows, each syllable carrying weight that seemed impossible to bear. Pack? Alpha? The terms felt familiar in some deep instinctual way that terrified her more than the stranger's presence. She tried to sit up straighter, to project strength she didn't feel, but the movement sent the room spinning around her in lazy, nauseating circles. "I don't understand," she said, fighting against the weakness that seemed to have settled into her very bones. "I don't know what you're talking about. I need to go home. I need to call my family. I need—" "What you need," Darius interrupted, stepping closer to the bed with movements that seemed to defy the laws of physics in their fluid perfection, "is to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Your old life is over, Isabella. The woman who went to sleep in her mundane little apartment 3 days ago no longer exists. In her place stands something far more valuable, far more important than she could have ever imagined. 3 days. The number hung in the air between them like a death sentence. 3 days of her life, simply gone, erased as if they had never existed. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to squeeze some memory, any memory, from the darkness that had swallowed those lost hours. "You're lying," she breathed. But even as the words left her lips, she could feel the truth of his statement settling into her chest like a stone. The light filtering through those heavy curtains was wrong for the time of day she remembered last seeing. Her body felt different, as if it had been taken apart and reassembled by unfamiliar hands. Darius reached the edge of the bed, his presence filling the space until she could barely breathe around the sheer force of his existence. When he sat down on the mattress, the expensive springs didn't even whisper under his weight, as if the very furniture recognized his dominance and submitted to it without question. "I understand your confusion," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that might have been considered soothing if not for the steel underlying each word. "The transition is never easy, especially for those who have lived their entire lives unaware of what flows through their veins. But you will adapt, Isabella. You must." "Transition to what?" The question tore from her throat with a desperation that made her ashamed. She had always prided herself on being strong, on facing challenges head-on. But this situation felt like trying to fight shadows with her bare hands. His golden eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel naked despite the layers of silk and cotton covering her body. "To your true nature, to your real purpose. You are here because you carry something precious within you, something that my people have been searching for across generations. You have been chosen to bear the next generation of our bloodline, to ensure that power and strength continue to flow through the veins of those who will come after us." The words hit her like a physical assault, each syllable driving deeper into her understanding until the full horror of her situation became crystal clear. Bear children. She was here to bear children for this stranger, for these people she didn't know, in service of a destiny she had never agreed to accept. "No," she said, the word erupting from somewhere deep in her chest with a force that surprised them both. "No, absolutely not. You're insane if you think I'm going to just lie here and accept this. I'm not some broodmare you can purchase or steal, or whatever the hell you think you've done." For a moment, something flickered behind those golden eyes, something that might have been surprise or even respect. But it disappeared so quickly, she wondered if she had imagined it entirely. "Your spirit is exactly what we hoped for," Darius said, and now his voice carried a note of genuine warmth that somehow made everything worse. "Strength of will is as important as strength of body in the children we hope you will give us. But make no mistake, Isabella, this is not a negotiation. This is your reality now." She tried to swing her legs over the edge of the bed to stand and face him as an equal rather than cowering beneath expensive sheets like a frightened child, but her body refused to obey. Her limbs felt heavy, disconnected, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. "What did you do to me?" she demanded, panic creeping into her voice despite her attempts to maintain control. "What kind of drugs did you give me?" "Nothing that will harm you," he assured her, reaching out as if to touch her face before apparently thinking better of it. His hand dropped back to his side, but she could still feel the ghost of contact that had never actually occurred. Simply something to ease the adjustment period. "Your body is learning to process changes that have been dormant your entire life. The weakness will pass." Changes. The word echoed in her mind, carrying implications she wasn't ready to face. What changes? What was happening to her body that required chemical assistance to process? As if summoned by her thoughts, the door opened again, and 3 more figures entered the room. 2 women and a man, all moving with that same liquid grace that seemed to be a hallmark of everyone in this place, except her. They were beautiful in a way that seemed almost supernatural, their features too perfect, their movements too controlled, their eyes too knowing. "Alpha," the older woman said, inclining her head in a gesture that managed to be respectful while somehow maintaining an air of authority. "The council is ready for the introduction ceremony." "Of course they are," Darius replied, his attention never leaving Isabella's face. "Tell them we will join them shortly. Isabella needs a few more minutes to adjust to her circumstances." The woman's gaze shifted to Isabella, and she felt herself being evaluated by eyes that seemed to see everything and judge it according to standards she couldn't begin to understand. She's smaller than we expected. Size has nothing to do with suitability, Cordelia, Darius said, his voice carrying a warning that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. You would do well to remember that. Cordelia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Of course, Alpha. I simply meant that she seems fragile. I hope she proves more durable than her appearance suggests. The casual cruelty of the statement hit Isabella like a slap. These people were discussing her as if she were livestock, evaluating her worth based on her ability to serve their purposes. The humiliation burned in her chest, mixing with fear and rage until she could barely think straight. "Get out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough venom to make all three newcomers look at her with surprise. "All of you just get out and leave me alone." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Darius said, rising from the bed with movements that seemed to barely disturb the air around him. "The ceremony must proceed. Your new family is eager to meet you." Family. The word was meant to comfort, she supposed, but it felt like another chain being locked around her ankles. These weren't her family. Her family was wherever she had been 3 days ago, probably wondering where she had disappeared to, filing police reports and putting up missing person flyers, with her picture smiling back at strangers from telephone poles and coffee shop bulletin boards. "I have a family," she said, trying to inject steel into her voice. "Real family, who love me and who are probably looking for me right now. When they find me, when the police find me, you're all going to prison for kidnapping." The 4 people in her room exchanged glances that spoke of shared secrets and private jokes. It was Cordelia who laughed first, a sound like silver bells dipped in acid. "Oh, my dear child," she said, moving closer to the bed with predatory grace. "The police, your human family, they believe you died in a car accident on the interstate 3 nights ago. Very tragic, very complete. There's nothing left to find, and no one left to look." The words hit Isabella like hammer blows, each one driving deeper into her understanding until she felt as if the entire world had collapsed in on itself. Dead. They thought she was dead, which meant that even if she somehow escaped from this place, she would be returning to a world that had already mourned her, already moved on, already forgotten the woman she used to be. "You're lying," she whispered, but she could hear the doubt creeping into her own voice. The certainty in Cordelia's tone, the casual way she had delivered information that should have been devastating, spoke to a level of planning and execution that terrified her. "I'm afraid not," Darius said, his voice gentler than it had been since she awakened. "It was necessary, Isabella. Your transition into our world required that all bridges to your old life be burned completely. There can be no going back, no half measures. You belong to us now, completely and irrevocably." The room began to spin again, but this time it had nothing to do with whatever drugs they had given her, and everything to do with the sheer magnitude of what had been stolen from her. Not just her freedom, not just her future, but her very identity. Isabella Martinez had died on a highway 3 days ago, and in her place sat a stranger wearing her face, breathing her breath, trapped in a nightmare that had no visible end. "Now," Darius continued, his tone becoming businesslike once more, "we need to prepare you for the ceremony. The pack needs to see you, to scent you, to understand that you are under my protection. It will help prevent unpleasantness later on." "What kind of unpleasantness?" she asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The young man who had remained silent until now stepped forward, his movements carrying the same predatory grace as the others, but with an edge of barely contained energy that spoke to youth and impatience. "Some of the pack question whether an outsider can truly serve the role you've been chosen for," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. "There will be tests, challenges to your worthiness. The ceremony tonight will help establish your position, but it won't eliminate all doubts." "Adrian speaks truthfully," Darius acknowledged. "My protection extends only so far, Isabella. Ultimately, you will need to prove yourself worthy of the role you've been given. But that is a concern for later days. Tonight, you simply need to survive your introduction to a world you never knew existed. Survive. The word hung in the air like a promise of violence to come. What kind of introduction required survival? What kind of people was she about to meet that posed such a threat that merely living through the encounter would be considered an accomplishment? "I want to see outside," she said suddenly, the words surprising even her with their intensity. "Before whatever this ceremony is, I want to see where I am. I want to understand what you've trapped me in." Darius considered her request for a long moment, those golden eyes studying her face as if trying to read her thoughts written in her expressions. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but you will not leave this room alone, and you will not attempt to escape. The forests surrounding this place are not kind to those who don't belong here, and you are not yet ready to face what hunts in the darkness between the trees." The warning should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with a strange sort of determination. Whatever waited outside, whatever horrors lived in those forests he spoke of, they couldn't be worse than the prison of silk and gold that surrounded her now. As the others filed out of the room, leaving her alone with Darius once more, Isabella forced herself to meet his gaze directly. She might be trapped. She might be helpless. She might have lost everything that had once defined her existence. But she would not let them see her break. Not yet, anyway. "When this ceremony is over tonight," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos raging in her chest. "When I've met your pack and proven I can survive your world, I want answers. Real answers, not more cryptic warnings about destinies and bloodlines. I want to know who you people really are, what you expect from me, and what I have to do to earn some kind of freedom within whatever this new reality is supposed to be." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been approval or perhaps just surprise at her continued defiance in the face of impossible circumstances. "Fair enough," he said. "But be very certain you're ready for those answers, Isabella. The truth about what you are, about what we are, about what you're truly capable of becoming. It will change everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world around you." After he left, Isabella sat alone in the luxurious prison of her room, staring out at forests that promised death to those who tried to escape, and wondered if the woman she had been 3 days ago would even recognize the person she was already becoming. But one thing was certain: she would find a way to survive this night and the next and all the nights that followed, until she could figure out how to reclaim some piece of the life that had been stolen from her, even if it meant becoming something she had never imagined possible. The dress they brought her was a masterpiece of midnight silk that clung to her body like liquid shadow, its deep blue fabric seeming to shift and shimmer with each breath she took. Isabella stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The stranger in the glass had the same dark hair, the same brown eyes, but there was something different now, something wild and untamed lurking just beneath the surface of familiar features. "You look perfect," said Elena, the younger woman who had been assigned to help her prepare for what they called the introduction ceremony. Her voice carried genuine warmth, but Isabella had already learned not to trust kindness in this place, where every gesture seemed calculated to serve some hidden purpose. "Perfect for what exactly?" Isabella asked, running her hands down the silk that felt like cool water against her skin. "What happens at this ceremony that requires me to dress like I'm attending my own funeral?" Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. "It's not a funeral. It's more like a presentation. The pack needs to see you, to understand your place among us. Alpha Darius wants to make it clear that you're under his protection." Protection. The word had been used several times now, always with an undertone that suggested the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Isabella turned away from the mirror, unable to bear looking at the stranger she was becoming for another moment. "And what if I don't want his protection? she asked, though she already suspected she knew the answer. Elena's expression became carefully neutral. That's not really an option. Not here. Not for someone in your position. The words confirmed what Isabella had been trying not to think about since awakening in this gilded cage. She truly was trapped, caught in a web of circumstances that seemed designed to eliminate any possibility of escape. But as she followed Elena through corridors lined with tapestries depicting scenes of wolves running beneath full moons, she found herself cataloging every detail, every potential exit, every weakness she might be able to exploit later. The great hall they entered took her breath away, despite her determination to remain unimpressed. Massive stone columns stretched up toward a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations that seemed to move and shift in the flickering light of countless candles. Long tables stretched across the space, already filled with people who turned to watch her entrance, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. But it was the way they moved that truly unsettled her. Every person in that hall possessed the same fluid grace she had noticed in Darius and the others, as if they were all part of some elaborate dance whose steps she had never learned. Their eyes reflected the candlelight in ways that seemed almost animal, and when they spoke among themselves, their voices carried undertones that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. Darius rose from a chair that looked more like a throne than furniture, his imposing figure immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. He wore simple black clothing that somehow managed to look more regal than any crown. And when his golden gaze found hers across the crowded room, Isabella felt that familiar electric shock that made her skin tingle with unwanted awareness. Brothers and sisters, his voice carried easily through the vast space without seeming to be raised. Tonight, we welcome Isabella into our family. She comes to us as a gift chosen by forces greater than ourselves to help secure our future and strengthen our bloodline. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd, and Isabella caught fragments of conversation that made her stomach clench with anxiety. Words like outsider and unproven and risk floated to her ears, along with others in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood on a visceral level. "Approach," Darius commanded, extending one hand toward her. Isabella hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to do anything except walk deeper into this trap that seemed to close tighter around her with each passing moment. But Elena's gentle pressure on her back reminded her that running was not an option, and that the only way through this nightmare was forward, one step at a time. The crowd parted before her like water, creating a clear path to where Darius waited. As she walked, she became acutely aware of every eye upon her, every whispered comment, every subtle gesture of dismissal or approval. The silk dress rustled around her legs with each step, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the hall. When she reached Darius, he took her hand in his, and the contact sent fire racing up her arm. His skin was warmer than human flesh should be, his grip strong enough to crush her fingers if he chose, but his touch remained gentle, despite the obvious power behind it. "Isabella Martinez," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "do you accept the protection of the Northern Pack? Do you accept your place among us as bearer of the next generation, keeper of our bloodline, guardian of our future?" The formal words hung in the air like a challenge, and Isabella realized that this was not merely ceremony, but contract. Whatever she said now would bind her to these people, to this place, to this destiny she had never chosen. But what choice did she have? They had already told her that her old life was gone, that the woman she used to be was officially dead. Refusing their protection would mean facing whatever lurked in those dark forests alone, with no resources and no knowledge of how to survive in this strange new world. She began, then stopped, her throat closing around words that felt like surrender. "Speak," Cordelia called from somewhere in the crowd, her voice sharp with impatience. We haven't got all night for your human hesitations. The dismissive tone sparked something fierce in Isabella's chest, a flame of defiance that had been smoldering since she first opened her eyes in that silk-sheeted prison. She might be trapped, she might be helpless, but she would not be broken, not by Cordelia, not by this ceremony, not by any of them. "I accept your protection," she said, her voice ringing clear and strong through the hall. "But I do not accept your ownership. I will bear children when and if I choose to, not because you have decided it is my purpose. I will contribute to your community as a member, not as property, and I will earn my place here through my own actions, not through breeding like some prize animal you've acquired for your collection." The silence that followed her declaration was so complete, she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Then Darius began to laugh, a rich sound that seemed to fill the entire space with warmth and approval. "Perfect," he said, squeezing her hand before releasing it. "Absolutely perfect." The crowd erupted in a mixture of shocked murmurs and nervous laughter. Some faces showed approval, others outright anger, but all showed surprise at her audacious rejection of the role they had defined for her. "The girl has spirit," called a voice from the back of the hall. "I'll give her that much." "Spirit won't help her when the blood moon rises," replied another. "We need results, not defiance." "Enough," Darius said, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Isabella has made her position clear. Now let us make ours equally clear." He turned to face the crowd, his posture shifting subtly from welcoming to commanding. "This woman is under my personal protection. Any who would challenge her place among us must first challenge me. Any who would harm her will answer to me personally. Any who would question her worth will have the opportunity to prove their own in single combat." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and Isabella watched as several faces in the crowd paled slightly. Whatever Darius was capable of in combat, it was clearly something that inspired fear, even among his own people. "Now," he continued, his tone becoming more conversational, "let us feast and celebrate the addition to our family. Elena, please escort Isabella to the high table. The evening's entertainment is about to begin." As Elena guided her toward a table positioned on a raised platform at the far end of the hall, Isabella caught glimpses of the preparations taking place around them. Servants moved with that same uncanny grace, carrying platters of food that smelled rich and wild, nothing like the processed meals of her former life. Musicians tuned instruments she had never seen before, their melodies carrying undertones that seemed to resonate in her bones. "You did well," Elena whispered as they climbed the steps to the high table. "Most newcomers are too terrified to speak at all during their first ceremony." "Most newcomers?" Isabella asked, settling into the ornate chair beside Darius's throne-like seat. "How many people have you brought here against their will?" Elena's expression became carefully blank. "That's not my place to discuss. You'll have to ask Alpha Darius about the others." Others. The word sent ice through Isabella's veins as she remembered Darius mentioning women who had failed in the role she was expected to fulfill. What had happened to them? Where were they now, and what exactly constituted failure in a community like this? Darius took his seat beside her, his presence immediately filling the space between them with that electric tension that made it difficult to think clearly. "You surprised them," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "That was well done. Surprise is often more valuable than strength in situations like these." "Situations like kidnapping, you mean?" she replied, not bothering to lower her own voice. His smile was sharp enough to cut. "Situations like survival, Isabella. Everything here is about survival, whether you realize it yet or not." Before she could ask what he meant, the lights in the hall dimmed, and the musicians began to play a melody that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to something primitive in her chest. The crowd fell silent, their attention turning toward the center of the hall where a space had been cleared. What happened next defied everything Isabella thought she knew about the world. a young man stepped into the cleared space, his movements fluid and controlled. As the music swelled around him, he began to change. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally and impossibly. His features shifted, his limbs elongated. His skin seemed to flow like water as it transformed into something covered in dark fur. Within moments, where a man had stood, a massive wolf now prowled the stone floor, its eyes glowing with intelligence that was utterly, unmistakably human. Isabella's grip on her chair tightened until her knuckles went white. This was impossible. People didn't change into animals. Physics didn't allow for such transformations. Biology didn't support such radical alterations of form and mass. And yet she was watching it happen, watching a dozen other people follow the first man's example, watching the great hall fill with wolves whose eyes held the knowledge and personality of the humans they had been moments before. "Now you begin to understand," Darius said, his voice still perfectly human despite the chaos of transformation occurring around them. "This is what we are, Isabella. This is the world you've been brought into. We are the children of two natures, bound by blood and moonlight to lives that span both human and wolf." The wolves moved through the hall in patterns that looked like dance, their movements synchronized in ways that spoke to pack instincts older than civilization. Some were massive, clearly alpha males, whose human forms commanded respect and fear. Others were smaller, but no less graceful, their wolf selves reflecting the personalities Isabella had glimpsed in their human forms. "It's impossible," she whispered, her scientific mind rebelling against the evidence of her own eyes. "So was your arrival here 3 days ago," Darius replied. "So is the strength you feel growing in your limbs even now. So are the changes taking place in your blood as we speak. Impossibility is simply another word for things we don't yet understand." As if summoned by his words, Isabella became aware of sensations she hadn't noticed before. Her hearing seemed sharper, picking up conversations from across the vast hall with startling clarity. The scents in the air were more distinct, layering themselves into a complex map of information about everyone present. And beneath her skin, something stirred, something that felt wild and free and utterly foreign to the woman she had always believed herself to be. "What's happening to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, what should have happened years ago," he replied. "Your heritage is asserting itself, triggered by proximity to others of your kind. You carry the blood of wolves, Isabella, whether you knew it or not. Being here, among us, is simply awakening what was always part of you." The dancing wolves began to shift back to human form, their transformations as fluid and impossible as their initial changes had been. Naked flesh replaced fur, human voices replaced howls, but the wildness remained in their eyes, the connection to something primal and powerful that seemed to pulse through the very air. "The blood of wolves," Isabella repeated, testing the words on her tongue. "You're saying I'm like you, that I can do what they just did. With time and training, yes. Though your transformation may be different from ours, stronger in some ways, more controlled in others. Mixed bloodlines often produce interesting variations." Mixed bloodlines. The phrase suggested a complexity to her heritage that she had never suspected. But then, 3 days ago, she would have laughed at anyone who claimed people could turn into wolves at all. The feast that followed was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. The food was rich and wild, flavors that seemed to awaken parts of her palate she hadn't known existed. The conversations swirled around her in a mixture of languages, some familiar, others completely foreign, but all carrying undertones that her enhanced hearing picked up with startling clarity. She learned that the pack controlled vast territories throughout the mountainous region, that they had existed for centuries, that they maintained careful balance with human authorities who remained ignorant of their true nature. She learned that children were precious and rare, that bloodlines were tracked with genealogical precision, that the birth of a strong heir could shift the balance of power between different packs. Most disturbing of all, She learned that her arrival had been planned for months, that her bloodline had been researched, that she had been chosen specifically for genetic compatibility with Darius and the potential strength of the children she might bear. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked, when a lull in conversation provided the opportunity. "Long enough to know that you were worth the risk of bringing you here," Darius replied. "Your grandmother's lineage traces back to the mountain packs of the old country. Your genetics carry markers that we've been seeking for generations." "My grandmother?" Isabella's fork clattered against her plate. "My grandmother was a perfectly normal human being who made terrible coffee and collected porcelain cats. She wasn't some kind of werewolf." "Wasn't she?" Darius asked, his golden eyes studying her face with unsettling intensity. "Think carefully, Isabella. Were there no strange stories in your family history, no unexplained absences, no relatives who were spoken of in whispers or not spoken of at all?" The questions hit too close to uncomfortable truths. There had been stories, whispered conversations that stopped when children entered rooms, family members who were mentioned only in the context of tragedy or disappearance. Isabella had always assumed they were the normal secrets that every family carried, the black sheep and outcasts that no one wanted to discuss in polite company. "Even if that's true," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "it doesn't give you the right to steal me from my life. I had a job, friends, plans for the future. You can't just erase all of that because of some genetic compatibility you think I carry. Your job was filing insurance claims in a cubicle where no one knew your name." Cordelia interjected from across the table, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your friends were acquaintances who wouldn't have noticed your absence for weeks if we hadn't arranged the accident. Your plans for the future involved growing old alone with a collection of houseplants and romantic novels. We've given you purpose, meaning, a chance to be part of something greater than your mundane little existence." The casual cruelty of the assessment hit Isabella like a physical blow, mainly because she couldn't deny the accuracy of most of it. Her life had been small, contained, safe in ways that now seemed like cowardice rather than prudence. But that didn't make their theft of it justified. "At least it was my choice," she said, her voice carrying more heat than she intended. "At least I was free." "Freedom is an illusion," Darius said, his tone becoming more serious. "You were trapped by circumstances, by genetics, by a society that had no place for what you truly are. We've simply exchanged one cage for another, but this one offers the possibility of growth, of becoming something magnificent instead of slowly dying in obscurity." The words stung because they carried just enough truth to be painful. But Isabella refused to let him see how deeply they affected her. "And if I refuse to see it that way?" she asked. "If I continue to resist this destiny you've planned for me?" "Then you will learn to survive among us on your own terms," he replied. "But make no mistake, Isabella, you will survive here or you will not survive at all. The world outside these walls is not kind to those who carry our blood but lack our protection. There are things hunting in the darkness that would consider you a delicacy worth savoring." The threat was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took her a moment to fully process its implications. Not only was she trapped in this place, but leaving would expose her to dangers she couldn't even imagine. The cage he offered might be gilded, but it was still a cage, and the alternative was something far worse than captivity. As the evening wore on and the celebrations continued around her, Isabella found herself studying the faces of the people who had become her captors, her protectors, her new family, whether she wanted them or not. Some watched her with curiosity, others with suspicion, a few with something that might have been sympathy. But all of them shared that otherworldly grace, that connection to something wild and powerful that she was only beginning to understand. When Darius finally rose from his chair, signaling that the formal portion of the evening was ending, Isabella felt a mixture of relief and dread. The ceremony was over, but now came the real test. learning to live among these people, learning to navigate their complex social structures, learning to become something she had never imagined she could be. "Walk with me," Darius said, offering her his arm. "There's something I want to show you before you retire for the evening." Against her better judgment, Isabella accepted his escort, allowing him to guide her from the great hall through corridors she hadn't seen before. The architecture was a fascinating blend of ancient and modern. Stone walls hung with contemporary art, medieval tapestries alongside electric lighting that somehow managed to feel warm and natural despite its technological origins. They emerged onto a balcony overlooking gardens that stretched away into moonlit forests beyond. The night air carried scents that made something in Isabella's chest tighten with unexpected recognition, as if her body knew this place, even though her mind insisted it was alien territory. "This is your home now," Darius said, his voice softer than she had heard it before. "I know that seems impossible to accept tonight, but in time you'll come to understand that you belong here in ways you never belonged anywhere else." Isabella gripped the stone railing, her enhanced senses picking up sounds from the forest that her human hearing never would have detected. There were things moving out there in the darkness, things that called to something deep in her blood, with voices that bypassed rational thought entirely. "What if you're wrong?" she asked. "What if I can't become what you need me to be? What if this awakening you're talking about doesn't happen, or happens but leaves me as something you can't use?" He was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting moonlight in ways that reminded her he was not entirely human, no matter how perfectly he wore human form. "Then we'll discover what you are meant to be instead," he said finally. "Destiny is not always what we expect, Isabella. Sometimes it's something far more interesting." As they stood there in the moonlight, surrounded by the wild sounds of a forest that called to blood she was only beginning to understand, Isabella realized that her old life truly was over. The woman who had filed insurance claims and eaten microwave dinners alone in a studio apartment was gone, as surely as if she had died in that staged car accident. But what would rise in her place remained to be seen, and for the first time since awakening in this strange new world, Isabella found herself genuinely curious about the answer to that question. The first transformation came to Isabella 3 weeks later, in the darkest hour before dawn, when moonlight streamed through her bedroom windows like liquid silver calling to something wild in her blood. She woke to pain, unlike anything she had ever experienced, her bones feeling as if they were being reshaped from the inside out. Fire raced through her veins, her skin burned with fever that no amount of cool air could relieve, and her senses exploded into overwhelming clarity that made her want to scream and sing simultaneously. But it was the hunger that nearly drove her mad. Not hunger for food, though her body craved raw meat with an intensity that horrified her rational mind. This was hunger for freedom, for running beneath open sky, for the feeling of earth beneath paws she didn't yet possess. Every cell in her body screamed for transformation, for the release of something that had been caged within her human form for 26 years. Darius found her huddled in the corner of her room, shaking with the effort of containing changes her body demanded, but her mind rejected. "Let it happen," he said, his voice gentle but commanding as he knelt beside her. "Fighting the change will only make it more painful. Trust your instincts, Isabella. Trust what your blood is telling you to do." "I can't," she gasped, her fingers digging into the hardwood floor with strength that left gouges in the expensive finish. "I don't know how. I don't know what I'm supposed to become." "You don't have to know," he assured her, his warm hands settling on her shoulders with a touch that somehow anchored her to sanity. "Your body knows. Your blood knows. Let them guide you." What emerged from Isabella's first transformation was not the sleek wolf form she had expected, but something far more extraordinary. She was larger than the pack wolves, her fur a deep, midnight black, shot through with veins of silver that seemed to capture and reflect moonlight. Her eyes remained human in their intelligence, but glowed with an inner fire that spoke to power she was only beginning to understand. Most shocking of all, she retained her human consciousness throughout the change, able to think and reason, even as her body took on an entirely different form. The pack wolves she had observed lost themselves in animal instinct during transformation. But Isabella remained Isabella, simply wearing a different skin. When she finally shifted back to human form, as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, she found Darius watching her with an expression of wonder and something that might have been fear. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one maintains human awareness during their first transformation. Most people don't achieve that level of control for years, if ever." Isabella pushed herself to sitting, surprised to find she felt energized rather than exhausted by the ordeal. "Maybe I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, his golden eyes studying her with new intensity. "You're definitely not." The implications of her unusual transformation rippled through the pack like wildfire. Within hours, Isabella found herself the subject of whispered conversations, speculative glances, and careful attention from pack members who had previously dismissed her as just another breeding prospect. Cordelia was the first to voice what others were thinking. "She's not fully wolf," the older woman declared during the morning assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the great hall. "That transformation was wrong, unnatural. She's some kind of hybrid, and we don't know what that means for any children she might bear." "It means they'll be stronger than pure wolves," argued Marcus, a young pack member whose own transformation Isabella had witnessed during the introduction ceremony. "Hybrid vigor is a real phenomenon. Her bloodline could revolutionize our genetic potential. Or contaminate it beyond repair," Cordelia shot back. "We have no precedent for this kind of mixed heritage. She could be carrying recessive genes that would weaken our children, make them vulnerable to human diseases, or worse." Isabella listened to them debate her genetic potential as if she were a prize-breeding animal, her anger building with each clinical assessment of her worth to their community. Finally, she could contain herself no longer. "I'm sitting right here," she said, her voice cutting through their argument with blade-sharp precision. "If you have questions about my bloodline, my transformation, or my potential contributions to your pack, perhaps you should address them to me instead of talking around me like I'm livestock." The hall fell silent. Dozens of pairs of eyes turning toward her, with expressions ranging from surprise to approval to outright hostility. Cordelia's face flushed with anger at being challenged so publicly. "You forget your place, girl," she snarled. "You've been here less than a month. You don't have the right to speak in assembly, let alone challenge pack elders." "Actually," Darius said, rising from his chair with movements that somehow conveyed both casual grace and subtle threat, "Isabella's transformation changes her status considerably. She's no longer a potential pack member under evaluation. She's proven her heritage, demonstrated abilities beyond what we expected, and shown the kind of strength that commands respect." He moved to stand behind Isabella's chair, one hand settling on her shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable protection and support. "From this moment forward, she speaks with the authority of my acknowledged mate. Her words carry the weight of my backing. Her challenges the power of my position." The declaration hit the assembled pack like a physical blow. Isabella felt her own shock mirror that of the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs as the implications of his words settled into her understanding. Acknowledged mate, not potential breeding partner, not probationary pack member, but mate. The term carried legal, social, and political weight that changed everything about her position in this community. "Alpha," Cordelia said, her voice tight with carefully controlled fury, "surely this decision is premature. The girl has been among us for mere weeks. Traditional courtship protocols exist for good reasons." Traditional protocols, Darius replied, his tone becoming dangerously soft, don't account for women who maintain consciousness during first transformation, who demonstrate hybrid abilities that exceed pure wolf capabilities, or who show the kind of courage Isabella displayed during her introduction ceremony. She's already proven herself worthy of respect. I'm simply making that respect official. Isabella's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening around her. This declaration solved several problems at once. It gave her official status that would protect her from challenges like Cordelia's. It established her right to speak and act with authority, and it sent a clear message about Darius's intentions regarding their relationship. But it also complicated everything in ways she wasn't sure she was ready to handle. Being his acknowledged mate would bring expectations, responsibilities, and pressures she hadn't anticipated dealing with so soon. I need to speak with you privately, she said, her voice pitched low enough that only Darius could hear. Of course, he agreed. Assembly is adjourned. We'll reconvene tomorrow evening to discuss territorial patrol schedules. As the pack filed out of the Great Hall, Isabella caught fragments of whispered conversations that ranged from congratulatory to concerned to actively hostile. She had gained official status, but she had also painted a target on her back for anyone who opposed rapid changes to pack hierarchy. When they were alone, Darius turned to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I suppose you have questions about my declaration, he said. A few thousand, Isabella admitted, starting with whether you consulted me before making decisions about my life and ending with what exactly you expect from an acknowledged mate. His smile was rueful. I knew you'd have concerns about the autonomy issue, but Isabella, what I did in there was give you power, not take it away. As my acknowledged mate, you have rights and protections that no one can challenge. You can speak in assembly, participate in pack decisions, and command respect from every member of this community. At the cost of binding myself to you in ways I don't understand, she pointed out. What does acknowledged mate mean, Darius? What am I agreeing to by accepting that title? He was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying her face, as if trying to read her thoughts written in her expressions. It means that I claim you as my equal partner, he said finally. Not my property, not my breeding stock, but my partner in leadership. It means that your voice carries the same weight as mine in pack decisions, that your safety is my primary concern, and that any threat to you is a threat to me personally. And what do I owe you in return? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Loyalty, he said simply. Support when I need it, honesty even when it's difficult to hear, and eventually, when you're ready, the children that will secure our pack's future. The last part made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. And if I'm never ready? What if I decide that bringing children into this world of pack politics and supernatural dangers isn't something I want to do? His expression became very serious. Then we'll face that challenge when it comes. But Isabella, I need you to understand something important. This isn't just about our pack anymore. Your transformation revealed abilities that will draw attention from other supernatural communities. Some of that attention will be positive, some neutral, but some will definitely be hostile. What do you mean? She asked, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. There are pack leaders who will see your hybrid abilities as a threat to their own bloodlines, he explained. There are supernatural councils who regulate interactions between different species, and your existence challenges some fundamental assumptions about how those interactions should work. And there are hunters, both human and otherwise, who would love to study someone with your particular combination of abilities. The weight of what he was telling her settled into Isabella's chest like a stone. Her transformation hadn't just changed her personally. It had made her a person of interest to forces she couldn't even imagine. So this acknowledgement, she said slowly, it's not just about pack politics. It's about protection from external threats. Partly, yes. But Isabella, I need you to believe me when I say that's not the only reason. What I feel for you, what's been growing between us since you arrived, that's real. The political advantages are secondary to the personal connection. She wanted to believe him. Despite everything that had happened, despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she couldn't deny the electric attraction that sparked between them every time they were in the same room. But trusting those feelings felt dangerous when so much else in her new life remained uncertain. I need time, she said. Time to understand what it means to be your acknowledged mate. Time to figure out how to use these new abilities. Time to decide if I can really build a life in this world you've brought me into. You have time, he assured her. But Isabella, while you're taking that time, please remember that we're stronger together than apart. Whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them better as partners than as adversaries. That evening, Isabella found herself walking alone through gardens that had become her favorite retreat when pack politics grew too overwhelming. The moonlight felt different now, calling to something in her blood that responded with eager recognition rather than fear. Her enhanced senses picked up sounds and scents from the forest beyond that spoke to the wild part of her nature she was still learning to accept. She was so absorbed in her own thoughts that she almost missed the subtle wrongness in the air, the scent that didn't belong to pack territory, the sound of movement that followed patterns unlike those of her adopted family. When the attack came, it was swift and coordinated, 3 figures emerging from shadows with speed that would have been impossible for human eyes to track. But Isabella's hybrid senses caught every detail. The silver weapons they carried, the military precision of their movements, the professional calm that spoke to extensive training in hunting supernatural prey. The first attacker reached her before she could fully process what was happening, his silver blade slicing toward her throat in a movement designed to kill quickly and quietly. But the enhanced reflexes that came with her transformation saved her life, allowing her to dodge within human speed and strike back with strength that sent her attacker flying into the garden's stone fountain. The second and third attackers adapted their strategy immediately, working together to corner her against the garden wall while keeping their weapons positioned to prevent her from transforming into wolf form. "Hybrid confirmed," one of them spoke into a communication device. "Unusual speed and strength, but she's fighting human style, proceeding with capture." Capture. They wanted her alive, which was somehow more terrifying than the prospect of death. Isabella had no idea who these people were or what they wanted with her, but every instinct screamed that allowing them to take her would mean horrors beyond imagination. The transformation that took her this time was different from her controlled first change. This was pure survival instinct, her body shifting into wolf form with explosive speed that caught her attackers completely off guard. But instead of losing herself in animal instinct as she had expected, Isabella found her human consciousness riding alongside her wolf nature, both aspects of herself working in perfect harmony. What followed was less fight than slaughter. Her hybrid form was faster, stronger, and more controlled than anything her attackers had prepared for. Within minutes, 2 were unconscious, and the third was fleeing into the forest, leaving behind weapons and equipment that would provide valuable intelligence about who had sent them. When pack members arrived, drawn by the sounds of combat, they found Isabella standing guard over the unconscious attackers, still in wolf form, but clearly in complete control of herself. Darius was among the first to reach her, his own transformation rippling through him as he scented the foreign intruders on pack territory. But when he saw Isabella standing victorious over her would-be captors, his wolf form seemed to shimmer with pride rather than aggression. "Well," he said after shifting back to human form, "I think we can officially say that your combat training is ahead of schedule." Isabella allowed her own transformation to reverse, her human form reasserting itself with the same fluid control she was beginning to take for granted. "Who were they?" she asked, nudging one of the unconscious attackers with her bare foot. Marcus, who had arrived with a small team of pack warriors, knelt beside the men and began searching their equipment. "Professional hunters," he reported after examining their weapons and communication gear. "Military-grade silver weapons, supernatural tracking equipment, and coordination devices that suggest they're part of a larger organization." "How did they find her?" Darius asked, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled rage. "Our territory is warded against supernatural detection, the same way we found her," Cordelia said, appearing at the edge of the garden with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Her bloodline carries markers that can be tracked by anyone with the right knowledge and equipment. I warned you that bringing her here would attract unwanted attention." "And yet," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still racing through her system, "here I am, having successfully defended myself and packed territory from professional hunters. Maybe the question isn't whether my presence here creates risks, but whether those risks are worth the advantages my abilities provide." The unconscious hunters were secured and would be interrogated once they regained consciousness. Their equipment was confiscated and would be analyzed by pack members with technical expertise. But the message of their presence was clear. Isabella's existence had attracted the attention of forces that posed a threat to the entire pack. As they walked back toward the main house, Darius kept pace beside her, his presence radiating protective energy that made her feel safer despite the evening's violence. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Everything changes things," Isabella replied. "The question is whether we adapt and grow stronger, or whether we let fear of change paralyze us into weakness." He smiled at that, his golden eyes reflecting moonlight in ways that reminded her of the wolf he could become at will. "Spoken like a true Luna." Luna. The term carried weight she was only beginning to understand, but for the first time since arriving in this strange new world, Isabella found herself genuinely curious about what it might mean to embrace that role fully. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with political challenges, supernatural threats, and personal decisions that would affect not just her own future, but the future of everyone she was learning to care about. But as they walked together through moonlit gardens where she had just proven her ability to protect what mattered, Isabella realized that she was no longer the terrified captive who had awakened in silk sheets 3 weeks ago. She was something new, something powerful, something that belonged in this world of shadows and moonlight and impossible transformations. And for the first time since her old life had been torn away, she found herself genuinely excited to discover what that something might become. The future stretched ahead like an uncharted forest, full of dangers and mysteries and possibilities that her human life never could have offered. And Isabella, who had once filed insurance claims in a cubicle and dreamed small, careful dreams, found herself ready to run headlong into whatever wilderness awaited her. After all, she was discovering that she had always been wild at heart. It had simply taken finding her pack to learn how to let that wildness free.